Hi, I'm Maribel. I was the quiet one, the daughter who never asked for much, the one who always waited her turn. So when my parents drained all $23,000 from my college fund to send my sister on a beach vacation, they thought I'd stay quiet, like always. But silence isn't the same as surrender. They came back tan, smiling, and full of stories, while I sat there, empty. And when the truth finally came out, it didn't explode. It ended everything. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop it in the comments. I want to know who's with me tonight. 2 weeks ago, I was standing in our kitchen in Mesa, Arizona, holding a yellow envelope I hadn't touched in years. It was late afternoon, warm light from the window stretching across the counter like it always did. The envelope sat in the same drawer it had been in since I was 17. Top left, next to old menus and dead batteries. Education Fund, for your future, written in my dad's bold Sharpie handwriting. It had been there for over a decade. I never opened it. I never had to. This stays here, safe, Dad said once, tapping it with his finger like he was blessing it. I must have been 16. We were sitting at the table, he was drinking instant coffee, and I was filling out scholarship applications I didn't even need because of that fund. That was the deal. We never touched it, never dipped into it, and when the time came, it'd be there, just waiting. And it always was. Even after I deferred college to help care for Grandma. Even after Sabine got accepted to USC, and my parents pulled from their retirement to make up the difference. Even after Dad lost his job in '09 and we switched to generic cereal, that envelope stayed sealed. I trusted it the way some people trust religion. Quietly, privately, fully. Back then, I thought that's what families did. I thought that meant we were good. Sabine always said I had the calm gene. She meant it as a compliment, but it never sat right. It meant I didn't make waves, that I adjusted. I was the youngest, and in our house, the youngest wasn't spoiled. They were expected to understand. Sabine needed more attention because she was sensitive. Sabine needed the car on weekends because she had real plans. Sabine got the bigger room because she was older and needed space. When I needed something, the line was always, "We'll figure it out, sweetie." But we never did. I learned how to shrink without folding. I'm not bitter, or at least I wasn't. That's just how our family worked. When Mom needed help organizing paperwork, it was me. When Dad wanted someone to go with him to pick up medicine, it was me. When Grandma passed and no one could handle the estate forms, it was me. And I showed up, not because I was the favorite, but because it was easier than arguing. Because if I stayed useful, I stayed safe. That's what I told myself. That envelope, it symbolized more than money. It meant I wasn't invisible. I never checked the balance, not once. It sounds naive now, but back then, it wasn't stupidity. It was survival. Asking questions stirred tension. Keeping the peace earned praise. I played my role. Dependable, low-maintenance Maribel. You learn quickly in families like mine. The quieter you are, the longer you last. Last Tuesday, Mom was making tacos. Her version, not the real kind. And Sabine was home for some reason. She hadn't lived here in years, but she was lounging at the table, scrolling her phone like she owned the place. "I cannot wait for next week," she said, grinning. Mom turned around from the stove, laughing. "You deserve it, honey." I looked up from slicing tomatoes. "What's next week?" They both paused, just for a breath. "Oh," Mom said, too casually, "nothing important. Just a little break. We've all been stressed." "All?" I asked. "You're going too?" Mom shrugged. "We all need some sun. It's been a long winter." I glanced at the drawer. Still closed, still safe. Sabine didn't say anything, just smirked and went back to her phone. I felt something in my chest twist. A ripple, not a wave. I didn't say anything, not then. What was I going to do? Ask them if my envelope was funding their beach trip? That would have been dramatic, accusatory, not like me. And besides, I didn't want the answer. Because what if I was right? I chopped the rest of the tomatoes in silence. The knife made a soft tap every time it hit the cutting board. Sabine's phone chimed again and again. Mom hummed. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower started up. Everything was perfectly normal. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone. The drawer was still there. The envelope still in its spot. I opened the drawer but didn't touch it, just looked. The edges were soft from age, like it had been handled more than I thought. I shut the drawer, went to bed, didn't sleep. Because here's the thing. When you grow up trained not to ask questions, you get real good at swallowing discomfort. But sometimes your body keeps score even when your brain won't play. I found myself staring at the ceiling, heart racing for no clear reason. The kind of tension you can't name, but it hums under your skin. A voice in my head whispered, "What if they already took it? What if it's gone?" I didn't ask. I still wanted to believe that envelope meant something. I still needed to believe my place in this family hadn't been erased. And anyway, if I was wrong, I'd just be causing drama. That's what they'd say. That's what they always said. So I didn't ask. I smiled, I made dinner, I stayed quiet. I didn't know it then, but that envelope was already empty, long before anyone dared to say it out loud. 2 days later, they were all smiles. It was a Thursday, early evening, still bright outside. The kitchen smelled like leftover pot roast and burnt toast. Mom had forgotten the bread again, and the dishwasher hummed softly under the counter. Dad leaned against the fridge, arms folded, trying too hard to look relaxed. Sabine was on the bar stool, spinning her iced tea with a straw, clearly in on something. I was drying dishes, standing near the drawer. That drawer. The envelope was still inside. I hadn't opened it. I hadn't even touched it since Tuesday night. But I could feel it like a heartbeat behind the wood. Then Dad cleared his throat. "So," he said, drawing the word out like it was meant to be a drum roll, "we've got a little surprise." I didn't move, just kept drying the spoon in my hand. Sabine looked up, grinning. Mom turned from the sink, eyes bright. "We're sending Sabine on a trip," she said, like she was announcing a raffle winner. "To the Keys," Dad added, like that explained everything. Warm sun, fresh air, maybe some clarity after this tough season. Sabine played it down, twirling her straw. I wasn't even sure about it, but they insisted. I blinked once, then twice, before setting the spoon on the counter. I didn't say a word. They kept going. "It's all booked," Dad continued. "Flight leaves Monday, oceanfront place, cute little bungalow. We figured she deserved a reset." He laughed lightly, as if expecting applause. No one looked at me. No one ever did when it wasn't about them. Sabine said something about needing sandals. Mom chimed in, "You can borrow mine, honey. They'll match that teal romper." My voice stayed stuck somewhere behind my ribs. They were planning a vacation like it was grocery day, like money just floated in through the vents. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was observing, watching them laugh, hearing the way their joy filled every inch of the room I'd just cleaned. The same room where I've boiled their tea, folded their bills, listened to their problems like it was a job I'd never applied for but couldn't quit. And then Mom glanced at me and said it. "You understand, right? You've always been the practical one." That word, understand, it didn't feel like a compliment. It felt like a lock clicking shut, like she was naming me something that suited their plans. "You don't really need much right now," she added gently. "You're not in a rush." The way she said it made it sound like I had abundance, like I had everything I needed so I wouldn't notice what was missing. Or what had been taken? Sabine didn't even look up. I smiled, or tried to. Not the kind that reaches your eyes, just enough curve to signal I was still playing the role they assigned. They kept talking. "Oh, and we got travel insurance this time," Dad said, like he was learning from some wise mistake. "Just in case." Sabine asked about the weather. Mom said, "High 70s all week. You'll glow." I stood there and wondered what it would cost to ask the one question burning in my chest. Where's the money coming from? Just 5 words. That's all it would take. I could say them. I could finally lift the lid off whatever this illusion was and make them answer. But I didn't, because that would ruin the mood. It would make me the problem. Again. Instead, I nodded, took another plate, rinsed it, even though it was already clean. I reminded myself this wasn't about me, even when it was. Later, while they moved into the living room to discuss airport rides and snacks, I stayed in the kitchen, alone, again. The drawer was still shut. I didn't open it. There was no point, I told myself. They would have said something if it involved that envelope. They would have at least asked, wouldn't they? I wiped down the counter, rinsed out the sponge, and turned off the light. But I stood there a moment longer, staring at the wood grain of the drawer handle. I wasn't ready to know. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't ready for me to. They were laughing in the living room. Sabine was asking if she should bring her new swimsuit or buy a new one there. Dad said, "Might as well treat yourself." Mom added, "That blue one makes your eyes pop." They talked about sunscreen and flight times, and I realized the question I hadn't asked was already too late. I couldn't sleep that night. The sound of the dishwasher cycling through its last rinse, the hum of the old ceiling fan, the occasional creak of pipes. Every noise felt louder than usual, like the house itself was trying to keep me awake. I laid in bed, eyes wide open, watching the shadows shift across the ceiling. My body was still, but my thoughts moved in circles. I didn't even hear when the sun started rising. Just noticed, all of a sudden, how the light had changed. Softer, cooler. Morning. I slipped out of bed without turning on the light. My feet knew exactly where the creaky floorboard was near the dresser, so I avoided it. I didn't want anyone to know I was up. I wasn't even sure why yet. Down the hall, the house was quiet. I passed the guest room Sabine used to crash in and moved into mine. Closed the door gently behind me and sat at my desk. It faced the window, and from there, I could see a sliver of our front yard, the same spot where Dad used to teach us how to ride bikes, holding the seat steady until we found balance on our own. I used to believe he'd always keep things steady. I powered on the old laptop. It hummed like it had arthritis, taking its sweet time. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, now half warm. I hadn't meant to bring it in from the night before. I just never drank it. I didn't log in to the bank account because I suspected anything. I'd checked it before now and then. The education fund was always there, untouched, labeled in bold, Maribel College Savings. It was routine, familiar, not a question mark. This time, though, when the page loaded, the numbers didn't greet me the same way. Balance, 0 €. I stared at it, certain it had to be a glitch, a mistake. I blinked, refreshed the page, still 0. My chest felt too still, no breath, no heartbeat. Just the blinking cursor on the screen and a date under the transaction history that made my stomach tighten. March 12th, withdrawal, $23,000. My eyes darted to the calendar hanging beside my desk. That was 4 days ago, the same day they made the announcement about Sabine's trip. I hadn't even known what to ask that evening, and now it was just, here, the exact amount, gone. I didn't cry, not even a lump in my throat. Just this strange, hollow echo inside me, like someone had clapped once in a cathedral and walked away. My hand went to the mouse, clicked the details. Sure enough, it was from the account labeled with my name. No transfer note, no apology memo. Just a clean, silent erasure. I stared so long at the screen that the glow started to blur. When I finally moved, it was to grab my phone. I took a screenshot, then another, just in case. I emailed them to myself, then saved them to an external drive I hadn't used in months. Every move was slow, deliberate, like sealing something for court, like proof of a crime that nobody would call a crime. That done, I logged out, closed the browser, sat back. The coffee had gone cold. I didn't warm it. Instead, my mind started replaying things I hadn't questioned, memories that suddenly felt sharper, crueler. The time I'd postponed registering for a class because Dad said we'd wait for the financial aid to hit first. The semester I skipped altogether to help care for Mom after her back surgery. She'd said, "You've got time, sweetheart. College will always be there." The conversations that all began with, "Later, when it makes sense," but somehow never circled back to me. It wasn't a spontaneous decision. It hadn't happened overnight. It was slow, intentional. Like termites in the walls, you don't see the damage until it's already collapsed. I rested my elbows on the desk and looked outside. A neighbor was walking their dog. The world kept moving. I could have walked straight into the kitchen. I could have held my phone up like a courtroom exhibit and said, "Care to explain this?" But I didn't. I copied the files into a folder on my desktop labeled Receipts. Not for revenge, not for some dramatic confrontation, just for me. I needed to see it, touch it, own the reality so no one could gaslight me into doubting it later. An hour passed, maybe more. Then I heard the soft creak of someone moving around, the shuffle of slippers on tile. That meant Mom was up, probably brewing her morning tea, humming like she always did when she thought no one else was listening. I didn't go to the kitchen right away. I waited until I heard the kettle shut off and the back door click closed. That usually meant she'd stepped outside for her 5-minute quiet time before the day officially started. Only then did I walk down the hall. The drawer was still there. Of course it was. Same yellow envelope, same black ink that read, "Education Fund for Your Future." I pulled it open gently, like it might hiss or bite. It didn't. The envelope was sealed but light. I opened it. Empty, no check, no note, not even a post-it. I stared at it for a second, then slid it back inside. Closed the drawer. That envelope used to be a symbol of trust, of promise, of something steady beneath my feet. Now it was a prop in a play I wasn't cast in. I didn't slam the drawer, didn't tear it up. I wasn't 12. Instead, I turned, walked back to my room, and sat on the bed. I wasn't going to say anything. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I finally understood something they didn't think I was smart enough to grasp. The truth, standing on its own, doesn't always change anything. People only hear it when it serves them. And I wasn't interested in shouting into a room that wasn't listening. I didn't confront them, not because I was weak, but because I finally understood what I was dealing with. They walked in like nothing had changed, sunburned and smiling, rolling their luggage across the tile like it was just another Tuesday. Sabine was the first through the door, her voice louder than it needed to be. "God, I forgot how dry the air is here," she laughed, tossing her beach bag onto the couch like she owned the place. Her skin was red across the bridge of her nose and shoulders, the kind of burn that would peel by Thursday. Dad followed behind her, sunglasses still hanging from his collar, his shirt half untucked. "I told you SPF 15 wasn't enough," he joked, nudging her arm. "You always think you're invincible." Mom trailed last, keys jangling, already talking about dinner plans. "Let's just order something tonight. Pizza? Thai? We deserve a break after all that travel." No one looked at me. I was sitting at the dining table, pretending to read a book I hadn't turned a page in for an hour. I didn't stand up. I didn't say welcome back. I didn't need to. The entire room already told me what my role was. They were tan, giddy, tired in that happy vacation kind of way. The way you get when you've slept with the windows open to ocean air and didn't have to check your bank account once. I noticed how Mom's nails were done differently, something glossy and light blue. New, not cheap. "Did you miss us?" Sabine tossed the question like a tennis ball she didn't care if I caught. I smiled thinly. "Sure," I said, and went back to my book. Dad opened the fridge, pulling out the orange juice like it was waiting just for him. "Man, it's good to be home, even if the sand followed us," he chuckled, brushing at his pants. No one asked me how things were while they were gone. They moved through the house with a confidence that made me feel like the guest. Sabine sat on the arm of the couch, scrolling through photos on her phone. "Wait until you see the place we stayed at. The ocean literally sparkled, like those filtered Pinterest boards. And the food? I gained 5 pounds, but totally worth it." Mom laughed. "Well, it's not like you'll have time to gain more. You're back to work next week." "Don't remind me." She stretched like a cat, her voice thick with dramatic fatigue. "Honestly, I think I need a vacation from my vacation." Dad poured 3 glasses of juice, 1 for each of them, none for me. I watched the condensation bead on their cups and thought, not for the first time, how easy it was for them to forget me when it was convenient. I stood up, taking my book with me, and moved toward the hallway. That's when Mom said it. "You always understand, right, honey?" I paused but didn't turn. "I mean," she continued, soft like she was trying not to wake something sleeping. "You've always been so good about these things, about waiting, about being patient. You just get it." That word again, understand. It didn't sound like a compliment. It sounded like a rule I hadn't agreed to, but somehow always followed. "I guess," I said over my shoulder, not waiting for a reply. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. The screenshots from the bank account were still on my desktop. $23,000. Gone, just like that. No conversation, no explanation, no apology. They didn't think they had to explain. That was the part that stuck like a splinter. Dad had said something offhand during dinner later, something about family money. I caught it between bites of salad. "You know, it all evens out in the long run," he'd said, not to anyone in particular. I wanted to ask, evens out for who? But I didn't. I knew that line wasn't an opening. It was a wall. Sabine talked about her tan. Mom brought up flights for Christmas. I watched the room like I was taking notes for a test, only I would have to take. And that's when it hit me. They really thought I was still playing the same part. Quiet, compliant, grateful. But that wasn't the role I was in anymore, not even close. They thought I was still waiting my turn, but I was already preparing to stop asking. The email came in at 7:42 a.m., buried between an ad for half-price tires and a newsletter I don't remember subscribing to. Subject line was simple. Final reminder, tuition payment due. Just that, nothing dramatic, no blinking red alert. Just cold, neutral words doing their job. I read it 3 times. Balance due, $11,546. Due date, Friday, 5 p.m. Unpaid, checks dropped from courses, no exceptions. I stared at the screen, then at my coffee, then back again. The liquid had gone lukewarm. I didn't sip. I just sat there, blinking slower than usual, like my brain had suddenly decided to load everything in buffering speed. The numbers didn't scare me. It was the tone. There was no emotion in that email, no apology, no warning shot, just facts, clear and unbothered, which made the whole thing feel even colder. I leaned back in my chair, my bedroom still dim from the half-closed blinds. Birds chirped outside like they had no idea what a bank account was, and for a moment I envied them for that. Part of me wanted to shut the laptop, go back to bed, pretend I never saw it. That part whispered things like, maybe you should defer again, wait another semester, save up. And then the old, familiar thoughts came rushing in, like they were already lined up behind the door, just waiting for a crack to slip through. You don't really need it now. Sabine's the one who needed a break. You've always been good at waiting. You're the reasonable one. They count on you for that. I rubbed my temples. There it was again, understanding. Like it was a trait I'd signed a contract on years ago, stamped and notarized. I stood up slowly, stretching my arms. My back cracked a little, as if even my spine was tired of bending. Without thinking, I drifted into the kitchen. The drawer was still there. So was the envelope. Yellow, faded, labeled in my dad's handwriting, Education Fund for Your Future. I pulled it out, held it in both hands. It was lighter than I remembered, or maybe I was just heavier now. I turned it over once, twice, then slipped it back into the drawer. There was nothing to find in there anymore, not even comfort. A few minutes later, I found him at the kitchen table. Dad was scrolling his phone, still in pajama pants, sipping orange juice like the world had never changed. I sat down across from him. He didn't look up right away. I waited, then I said it, calmly, evenly. The question that had been lodged behind my ribs for days. Who did that money belong to? His thumb froze mid-scroll. Slowly, he set the phone down. He looked at me, not startled, but calculating. Like he wasn't surprised I asked, only that I picked now. It was family money, he said, choosing his tone like a lawyer would choose words. We used it for the family. That was it. No elaboration, no name of whose education it was for. Just we. Just family. Mom entered from the hallway, her robe tied too neatly for someone who claimed to be just waking up. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes darting between us. "She asked about the fund," Dad said flatly. Mom gave a tight smile and moved to the stove. "Sweetheart," she started, buttering a pan like it was any other morning. "You've always been the one who understood. We didn't think you'd take it this way." "Take it what way? Like it was a gift they had the right to rewrap and give to someone else." "I didn't take it anyway," I replied. "You did." Dad sighed, leaned back, his voice deeper now. "Maribel, it's not just about dollars and cents. These things are more complicated than you think." "No," I said, still calm. "They're really not." They both went quiet. I knew what they expected, tears, raised voice, maybe a dramatic exit, but I gave them nothing, just stillness. "I'm not here to argue," I continued. "I'm telling you, that money needs to be returned or accounted for." Dad narrowed his eyes. "Watch your tone." That made me smile, just a little. The way someone does when they've already done the math and knows the answer in advance. "This isn't about tone," I said. "It's about what's fair." Mom turned off the burner. The smell of melted butter lingered. "Don't do this," she said softly. "Not over something like this." Something like this. I stood up slowly. "You're not hearing me. I'm not threatening you. I'm not storming off. I'm just telling you where things stand." They didn't say a word, and I knew why. Because in their minds, I'd always been the one who took the fall quietly, who waited, who adjusted, who understood, and they thought this was just another uncomfortable conversation. A bump. A moment I'd process and move past like always. But I wasn't processing anymore. I wasn't adjusting. They thought this was just another uncomfortable conversation. I knew it was the last one I'd have without acting. 2 days passed in silence, but not the kind they thought it was. I wasn't sulking, I wasn't retreating. I was watching, measuring everything they didn't say. measuring how easily they went on like nothing had happened. That morning, I got dressed early. Not with any flair, just jeans, a plain shirt, clean shoes. But I made my bed with sharp corners. I brushed my hair until it lay flat. I moved like someone heading to a job interview, not a quiet war. I didn't tell them I was going out. I didn't owe that kind of notice anymore. I drove to the credit union branch just off University Drive, the same one where Dad took me years ago to open the account. I remember that day. I had braces and still believed money in envelopes meant something sacred. Inside, the place looked exactly the same. Frosted glass, muted carpet, the faint smell of printer toner and pine-scented floor cleaner. A young woman named Tessa called me over, her name badge blinking in the sunlight through the window. I sat across from her, calm and polite. I didn't ramble, just handed her my ID and told her I needed a printed statement for a specific savings account that had been closed recently. She clicked away, no questions. I kept my hands folded in my lap. A few minutes later, she handed me the pages, stapled top left corner, black and white, ordinary. But there it was, right in the middle of the first page, a single withdrawal of $23,000. The same day, Sabine posted a beach selfie captioned, "Sometimes you just gotta reset." There were no small purchases before or after, just one clean sweep, all of it. I kept my face still, but something in my stomach shifted, like the floor underneath me had dropped an inch. I flipped to the last page. Tessa had included the transaction authorization form. The section labeled Account Owner Signature was signed. But it wasn't my signature. It looked like mine, but it wasn't. My name was spelled right and the curves were close, but anyone who'd seen me sign a birthday card could tell the difference. The loops were tighter, the M was off, and I never dotted my I with a sharp jab like that. Tessa smiled, oblivious. "Anything else I can help you with today?" I looked up at her. My mouth felt dry. "No, thank you. This was exactly what I needed." I walked back to my car without noticing the heat rising off the sidewalk. I didn't start the engine right away. Just sat there, the statement folder resting on the passenger seat like a sleeping dog. It wasn't just money anymore. It was forgery. And it wasn't an accident. That signature didn't float onto the form. Someone filled it out, signed it, and believed I'd never check. They were right, until now. I wasn't angry in that moment, not loud angry. What I felt was colder, heavier, like wet cement setting slowly inside my ribs. And I think that scared me more. That evening, I went to the public library, not to cry, not to escape, but to read. I looked up legal definitions. Authorization, fiduciary breach, fraud. Then I searched student legal aid clinics and local legal volunteers. I made notes. I didn't even take the papers home. I scanned everything to a USB drive I kept in my purse, then shredded the originals in the library's disposal bin. I wasn't making threats. I was building a record. I knew now that if I confronted them again, they'd twist it into a misunderstanding, or worse, a favor. They'd say something like, "We needed to move fast," or "You'd have said no, and we knew it was for the best." And the saddest part? They'd believe it. Because I'd spent 22 years proving I'd never fight back. I'd listen, I'd nod, I'd try to keep the peace. They counted on that version of me. I left the library at sunset. The air had cooled. I didn't rush. That night at dinner, I sat at the table, quiet as usual. They thought I was sulking. Dad asked if I'd gotten any updates from the college. Mom asked if I'd given more thought to taking a gap year. Sabine was scrolling on her phone, laughing at something I couldn't see. I nodded at the right times, said nothing more. I wasn't sulking, I was watching. Because now I knew the rules. And more importantly, I had the receipt. They thought my silence meant surrender. What it really meant was evidence. 4 days went by after I gathered the records, and something subtle shifted in the house. Not loud, not obvious, just enough to make the air feel thinner. I kept my routine steady. I answered texts with short, neutral replies. I'm fine. Busy today. We'll talk later. I still showed up for dinner. I still rinsed my plate and set it in the rack. I didn't raise my voice or withdraw into my room. From the outside, nothing looked different. That's what unnerved them. I could see it in the way my mother watched me from across the kitchen island, her hands paused mid-motion while she folded a dish towel. I could hear it in the way my father cleared his throat before speaking, as if rehearsing a line he hadn't decided on yet. Silence, I learned, is unsettling to people who rely on reactions. That evening, my father started in first. He leaned back in his chair and sighed, long and theatrical. "You've been distant," he said, like he was stating a concern, not launching an accusation. "Cold, even." I met his eyes and waited. I didn't fill the space. My mother stepped in quickly. "We're just worried about you," she added. "You seem different, not yourself." Different meant I wasn't smoothing things over. It meant I wasn't reassuring them that everything was okay. Sabine stayed quiet, scrolling through her phone, but I could see her listening. Dad continued, voice firmer now. "That money was family money. We told you that. It wasn't taken. It was used temporarily." There it was, the reframing, not theft, not deception, just a responsible decision. I was apparently too emotional to understand. "You're blowing this out of proportion," my mother said gently. "You've always been so level-headed. Don't let stress turn you into someone you're not." The message landed exactly as intended. Be reasonable or be labeled unstable. I nodded once. "I hear you," I said. That seemed to throw them off. They'd expected a defense, maybe tears, maybe anger, anything they could push against. Instead, I stood up, rinsed my glass, and went to my room. The next morning, my phone buzzed before I even got out of bed. A text from my aunt in Phoenix. "Hey, sweetie, just checking in. Your mom said you've been having a hard time lately." Hard time. Not financial trouble, not betrayal, just vague emotional fragility. Later that day, a cousin messaged me something similar. Then another relative commented on one of my photos with, "Hope you're taking care of yourself." By the third message, the pattern was clear. A story was being told without me in the room. I sat at my desk, heart beating faster than I wanted to admit. The old reflex kicked in hard. Explain yourself. Fix it. Get ahead of it. I imagined calling my aunt, laying out the facts, begging her to understand. But I stopped. Because that was the trap. If I rushed to defend myself, I'd look exactly like the version of me they were describing. Instead, I opened a folder on my laptop and started saving everything. Screenshots of messages, time-stamped voicemails, notes on who said what and when. I didn't respond emotionally. I responded briefly, politely, or not at all. Silence, refined. That night, while I was making tea, my grandmother called. We talked about the weather, her garden, the neighbor's dog. Then carefully, she said, "Your mother mentioned she's worried about you. She says you've been confused lately." Confused. I stared at the steam curling up from my mug. That word hit harder than I expected. Confusion implies incompetence. It implies someone else needs to step in. "I'm clear," I said evenly. "And I'm okay." There was a pause. "Well," my grandmother replied, uncertain. "I just wanted to hear it from you." After we hung up, my hands shook, not from fear, but from the realization of how far this was going. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about control, about protecting themselves by undermining my credibility before I ever spoke. I went to bed early that night but didn't sleep much. I replayed conversations from years past, moments I'd brushed off as harmless. Now they lined up into something sharper, something deliberate. By morning, the decision felt heavy but solid. If they were willing to paint me as unstable in private, then the truth couldn't stay private. It had to land somewhere solid, somewhere documented, somewhere they couldn't rewrite it later. Not emotional, not impulsive, precise. They tried to destroy my credibility before I spoke, so I decided where and when the truth would land. The invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon, folded into a message that tried very hard to sound gentle. "We think it would help to talk as a family," my mother wrote. "Everyone's worried. Let's clear the air." She listed names at the bottom: aunts, an uncle, my grandmother, even 2 cousins I barely spoke to anymore. It wasn't a conversation, it was an audience. I stared at my phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the table. My pulse stayed steady. That surprised me. A week earlier, this would have sent me spiraling. Now it felt like confirmation. They weren't inviting me to speak. They were inviting me to be corrected. I arrived just before sunset. Cars lined the street, more than usual, and the house hummed with voices before I even opened the door. The living room chairs had been arranged in a loose circle, as if this were a support group. Someone had turned on extra lamps. The light was warm, almost forgiving. My father stood when he saw me. "Thanks for coming," he said, already slipping into the role of reasonable authority. I nodded and took a seat near the end. I didn't bring a bag, just a folder tucked under my arm. Once everyone settled, my father began. He spoke slowly, carefully, like a man explaining a difficult situation he'd already resolved. "We're here because families go through misunderstandings," he said. "And sometimes stress makes people see things that aren't quite accurate." My mother leaned forward. "We've always done our best to support both our daughters," she added. "Sacrifice is part of parenting. Sometimes it's misunderstood." No one interrupted. Heads nodded. The room wanted harmony more than truth. Sabine sat across from me, arms crossed, eyes flicking between our parents and the floor. She hadn't spoken to me in days. Then my aunt cleared her throat. "We're just concerned," she said. "You've seemed overwhelmed lately, Maribel. A little scattered." There it was, spoken aloud now. Not a whisper, not a suggestion. A diagnosis offered casually, with witnesses. I felt every eye turn toward me. I didn't rush to answer. I folded my hands in my lap and waited until the silence stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable. "May I clarify a few facts?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. That seemed to unsettle them more than anger would have. My father hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." I stood and placed the folder on the coffee table. I opened it slowly, laying each page out one by one. "These are the bank statements from the education account," I said. "They show a full withdrawal of $23,000. A murmur rippled through the room. "The withdrawal happened 3 days before the vacation," I continued. "The account requires my written authorization for that amount." I turned the final page around so everyone could see it. "This is the signature used." My uncle leaned forward. "That's not yours." "No," I said. "It isn't." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Someone inhaled sharply. My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked at my mother, who stared at the floor. Sabine's head snapped up. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice tight. "It means," I said gently, "that the money was taken without my consent." No one spoke for a long moment. The authority my parents had carried into the room drained away quietly, like air from a punctured tire. Questions started then, but not toward me. When did this happen? Why wasn't she told? Why say she was confused? My parents had no clean answers. Every response tangled into another explanation that didn't hold. I stayed quiet. The truth didn't need help anymore. Eventually, people began to stand. Coats were gathered. Apologies murmured, some sincere, some awkward. My grandmother hugged me tightly before she left. My parents remained seated, smaller somehow, surrounded by the wreckage of their own version of events. I picked up my folder and headed for the door. The truth didn't explode, it settled, and nothing in that room survived it. After the room emptied, I didn't move right away. I sat in my car with the keys in my hand, staring at the porch lights flickering off one by one. There were no final shouts, no slammed doors, just quiet. It wasn't victory, not the kind that comes with relief or applause. It was more like the end of a storm that had soaked everything. And now I had to live in what remained. Back home, the silence felt heavier than usual. My parents kept their distance. We shared the same roof, but not the same air. They tiptoed around me, speaking only when necessary, their words clipped and practical. There were no apologies, no explanations, just avoidance disguised as civility. The money wasn't returned, not entirely. A portion, maybe a third, showed up in a check left on the kitchen table one morning, without a note. No names on the envelope, no eye contact when I passed them later that day. Sabine didn't speak to me at all. She didn't gloat. She didn't rage. She simply disappeared into her world, headphones on, eyes averted. Something had changed in her, but I didn't know what it was yet. And for the first time, I wasn't sure it was my responsibility to find out. 2 weeks passed this way. I kept to myself, poured more time into researching alternative grants, filed appeals, waited on hold for hours. I cleaned out drawers, donated old clothes. I took quiet walks at dusk and started writing in an old journal again. Not because I needed answers, just to remember how to hear my own voice again. One morning, I found the yellow envelope tucked between 2 books on my shelf. I hadn't seen it since that night at the kitchen table weeks ago. I sat down at my desk, held it for a moment. It didn't feel like a promise anymore, just paper. I slid out the single sheet, the one my dad had printed all those months ago with words like, "For your future," scribbled across it. I read it once, then tore it in half, then again, then again. I didn't cry, I wasn't angry. I just stood, walked it to the trash, and let it go. Later that afternoon, I had an appointment at the Student Resources Office on campus. The advisor, Ms. K, greeted me kindly. No pity in her eyes, just direct support. We discussed funding paths I hadn't known existed. Emergency student aid, work-study programs, private scholarships. It wasn't magic, and it wouldn't cover everything, but it was real. She printed out forms and circled deadlines. I thanked her, tucked everything into a folder, and stepped back into the crisp Arizona air. The sun hit my face just enough to remind me that I was still moving forward. On the way home, I stopped at a quiet diner and treated myself to a cup of coffee. No celebration, just a small act of choosing myself. That night, lying in bed, I let my mind drift back to everything that had happened. Not the facts, I'd replayed those enough, but the feeling underneath it all. For years, I had measured love in terms of sacrifice. I had confused tolerance with loyalty. I had convinced myself that keeping the peace meant keeping the family. But it wasn't true. What they owed me wasn't the money. It was honesty, safety, basic respect. And those were debts they never planned to repay. Letting go of that hope hurt in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't bitter. It was the kind of grief that settled quietly, like dust on a shelf, not demanding to be wiped away, just noticed. But in that grief, something softened. I stopped trying to make them into people they couldn't be. I stopped asking for recognition from mouths that only knew how to rewrite stories. I had always thought strength was endurance, keeping quiet, holding it together, not breaking. But now strength looked different. It looked like choosing to walk away from what broke me. It looked like drawing a line, even if no one clapped when I did. It looked like rebuilding on my own terms. I didn't lose my family that day. I stopped losing myself.